I didn't raise my voice when the HOA president jabbed a finger toward my chest and told the officers I was stealing community resources. I didn't interrupt when she insisted I was some rogue homeowner siphoning gas illegally and demanded I be arrested on the spot. I just reached into my jacket, set my badge and credentials on the hood of her car, and waited. The silence that followed was the kind you feel in your ears. One of the officers finally cleared his throat, looked at her, and asked if she wanted to rephrase her complaint. That was the moment everything she thought she knew about power quietly collapsed. Brief pause. Before all of that, my life in that neighborhood was exactly what I'd been hoping for when I bought the place. I'd spent over 25 years in law enforcement, most of it in a city where noise never really stops and problems don't politely wait their turn. When I finally made chief, the job came with respect and responsibility, but also with a constant hum of stress that followed me home every night. My wife and I agreed that when the opportunity came, we wanted somewhere calmer, somewhere that felt like a reset rather than a reward. The subdivision looked perfect on paper: tree-lined streets, modest homes, a small private fuel station that had been built decades ago when the area was more rural. I liked the idea of routine again. Morning coffee on the porch, light yard work, the quiet satisfaction of fixing things myself. I wasn't interested in running anything. I didn't want committees. I didn't want authority. At work, I carried enough weight. At home, I just wanted to be another guy mowing his lawn and waving at neighbors. Pause. The house itself wasn't fancy, but it felt solid. The previous owner had taken care of it, and I took pride in continuing that. The garage had an old generator hookup and a small auxiliary fuel tank that fed it. Something I appreciated, given how often storms knocked out power in the area. I spent weekends organizing tools, cleaning gutters, getting to know the rhythm of the place. People were polite at first, if a little distant. That didn't bother me. I've learned over the years that peace doesn't need an audience. I didn't attend HOA meetings. I didn't volunteer opinions. I didn't even read the newsletters beyond skimming for road closures or maintenance notices. As far as I was concerned, if I wasn't causing problems, no one would come looking for me. Short pause. That illusion lasted about 3 months. The first notice showed up taped to my garage door. Bright paper, meant to be impossible to miss. It claimed I was in violation for unauthorized use of community fuel resources. I remember standing there in the driveway, rereading it, genuinely confused. I wasn't using any community fuel. The gas in my tank was purchased by me, delivered by a local supplier I'd used for years. The tank itself predated the HOA by decades. It was part of the original infrastructure, from when the land was still semi-industrial. I assumed it was a mistake, the kind of clerical error that happens when someone new joins a board and wants to look busy. I sent a polite email explaining the situation, attached copies of my fuel receipts, and thought that would be the end of it. Pause. Instead, the letters escalated. The tone shifted from curious to accusatory, then to outright hostile. They claimed the tank was illegally connected to a shared emergency reserve, that I was depriving the community of a critical resource. They threatened daily fines, suspension of access to amenities, and eventually, legal action. One afternoon, I came home to find the HOA president standing near my driveway, arms crossed, taking pictures of my garage. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't ask questions. She simply informed me that I was stealing gas, and that if I didn't make it right, she'd involve the authorities. The absurdity of that statement almost made me laugh, but I could tell she wasn't joking. She believed, or at least wanted others to believe, that she had absolute control over anything within the subdivision's borders. Pause. I tried, briefly, to reason with her. I explained calmly that the tank was mine, that it wasn't connected to any HOA system, and that accusing someone of theft was a serious matter. She brushed it off, told me the board had already decided. That was my first real taste of how things worked there. Decisions weren't made based on facts or bylaws. They were made based on who spoke the loudest and who backed down first. Still, I kept things civil. I sent more emails, requested a meeting, cited sections of the HOA's own governing documents that clearly limited their authority. The responses were either dismissive or non-existent. Instead, I started receiving notices about unrelated issues. My grass was half an inch too long. My trash cans were visible for 15 minutes past the approved window. None of it stuck legally, but the message was clear: comply or be punished. Pause. The moment she called the police was almost predictable in hindsight. I was topping off my generator tank after a storm when she pulled up. Phone already in hand. She accused me loudly of draining the community fuel supply. Demanded I stop immediately. I told her again that she was mistaken, that calling law enforcement over a civil dispute was inappropriate. She dialed anyway, making sure to mention theft and suspicious behavior. I stood there listening, and something shifted inside me. Not anger, not frustration. Focus. I'd spent my career dealing with people who mistook authority for entitlement. I knew the pattern, and I knew where it usually led. Pause. After that day, I stopped trying to persuade her. I stopped sending emails meant to smooth things over. I started reading. I pulled my property deed from storage, compared it to the HOA's plat maps. I requested records from the county, digging into the original zoning and infrastructure agreements tied to the land. What I found wasn't shocking, so much as it was sloppy. The fuel station the HOA claimed ownership of had been built as part of a public-private partnership decades earlier, with specific carve-outs for certain properties, including mine. My tank wasn't an offshoot of their system. It was the original source, grandfathered in, explicitly, excluded from HOA control. The board either didn't know this or didn't care. Both possibilities were equally troubling. Pause. I documented everything. Dates, times, photographs, copies of letters. I spoke with a property attorney, not as a client looking for a fight, but as someone confirming facts. The more I learned, the clearer it became that the HOA president had built her authority on intimidation and ignorance. Neighbors stopped chatting when I walked by. Some avoided eye contact altogether. My wife noticed it before I did, the way conversations died down when my name came up. It bothered her more than it bothered me, but it added weight to the evenings I spent at the kitchen table, surrounded by paperwork. Planning next steps. I wasn't interested in revenge for its own sake. I wanted the harassment to stop, and I wanted it to stop for good. Pause. The board meeting where it all came to a head was scheduled as a special hearing regarding my alleged violations. The room was packed, partly because people love drama, partly because the president had framed it as a matter of community safety. She spoke first, laid out her version of events with confidence that bordered on theatrical. When she finished, she turned to me, as if expecting an apology. I didn't give one. I calmly explained the history of the property, referenced specific clauses in the county records, and then, when she tried to interrupt, I set my credentials on the table, not as a threat, but as a reminder that false accusations have consequences. The shift in the room was immediate. The board's attorney asked for a recess, during which I handed him copies of the documents I'd brought. He didn't need long. Pause. By the time we reconvened, the narrative had changed completely. The HOA withdrew its claims, citing a misunderstanding. They quietly acknowledged they had no authority over my fuel system. The president didn't apologize. She didn't have to. The damage was already done. Within weeks, she resigned, followed by 2 other board members who suddenly remembered prior commitments. The fines were rescinded. The notices stopped, and the neighborhood exhaled, in a way I hadn't realized it needed to. Final pause. Life is quieter now. People wave again, some sheepishly, some with genuine relief. I use my generator when I need to, buy my own gas, and enjoy the simple routines I moved there for in the first place. I didn't set out to dismantle anyone's little kingdom. I just refused to give in to someone who thought fear was the same as authority. The irony isn't lost on me that calling the police was what ended her reign. Power, real power, doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be prepared.